This week on the Indie Author Showcase, why some books wind up on the do not finish pile, how to make dream sequences in your books not suck, and we are showcasing Punk Rock Time Machine. All that and more on this week's Indie Author Showcase. Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase, the podcast by indie authors for indie authors. I am your host, multi-award-winning author Chad Robert Morgan, and let's get into it. First thing I want to mention is I've had a few people ping me on social media saying, hey, how can I get my book to you? So real simply, email me at IAS, that's Indie Author Showcase, IAS at spectralinkproductions.com. You can send me a promo code for an Audible download. You can send me your book on PDF. Any kind of, Google Docs is fine. Word doc is fine. All that kind of stuff. Here are the rules, okay? Nobody gets charged for being put on the podcast. If you send me your work, I will get to it as soon as possible. Remember, I am very busy. I'm doing the podcast. I'm writing my own books. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm doing the conventions. So my time is limited. But I will get to it as soon as possible. If I like it, I will put it on the showcase and highlight it for everybody. If I don't like it, I've never seen it before in my life. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. There has been a few cases where a book comes across my desk and it's instantly goes into the DNR or the DNF pile, the did not finish. It could be for various reasons. It is never because of the subject matter. Okay? We will review books for anybody doing anything. If it's you got a dark romance, fine. If it's a children's book, fine. If it's, LGBTQ furries, I actually have one of those books over here on my list. It's fine. Content doesn't matter. We are all inclusive. Anything that your book is about. We did used to have a non-spicy clause back in the day when I was doing it with my teenage son, but he's jumped ship. I'm doing it by myself. So spicy is now also on the menu. So, and we've done that a few times. We've done Aaron Lewis's book. We've done, we just recently did Feral MMMF, which was pretty spicy. So, any and all subject. The only thing I'm really not looking forward to or trying to avoid is basically just Penthouse Forum, right? I'm not looking to do straight out porn. But if it's a spicy book, if it actually has a plot, yeah, fine, give it to me. That's fine. If your book starts, Dear Penthouse Forum, I didn't think this would ever happen to me. Yeah, I'll skip that. Fine. So keep in mind, though, just because I get it doesn't mean I'm going to like it. And just because I get it doesn't mean it's going to go on the showcase. What are a few books that I did not... Obviously, I'm not going to out books I don't like. That's not the purpose of the podcast. But let me talk a little bit about some of the things that I have read where I'm like, oh, okay, no, I can't do this. One book... It started out good, and then it got into a bunch of tell not show. And that immediately turned me off. Because it felt very unpolished and amateurish. This person was fat. This person was skinny. This person was a pain in the butt. That kind of... It's like, no. There's an argument that says sometimes you want to tell not show because you kind of want to stream through things, but when you're telling and not showing, it stops being a book and starts being an essay or a book report, right? It's not nearly as interesting, and it gets boring real quick. Similar thing if you are starting a book and it is just... I had another situation like that. It basically was another tell not show, but there was like a whole chapter of just exposition dump. And I get it. You're trying to get people caught up in the world and where you are. but there are usually more elegant ways to do that than exposition dump. And then we started getting into the first chapter, and it was more exposition dump, and so I passed on that one. The last one, I just, and again, I'm just kind of giving you notes for those who are writing. Um, the last one, I actually finished the book. It actually wasn't that bad of a story or that badly written. But what killed it for me was, one, there was a lot of chaffa. And I've talked about this before. Chaffa is basically fluff, right? That I tend to use the definition from a Kevin Smith routine where he was working with Bruce Willis, and Bruce Willis was going through the script going, chaffa, chaffa, chaffa. He's like, what's chaffa, boss? And he's like, it's fluff. It doesn't move the story around. It's just extra. It's garbage. It's chaffa, right? I think technically, literally, chaffa means like garbage or waste or something like that. But in the context of how I'm using it, chaffa is just extra fluff that doesn't add to the story. It's not building character. It's not world developing. It's not moving the plot forward. It's useless, right? If you can cut it and the story doesn't change, it's chaffa, right? And then at the end, it's like it was hard to get in the book because you're wading through this chaffa, right? You're trying to get to the meat of the story, and you're wading through this BS. Oh, these people, they're having problems with their college admissions. These people are having, problems with they're getting a little too drunk over here. When the story starts going, none of that matters. It goes away, right? Then why did we talk about it in the first place? And then we finally get to the meat of the story, and there's like this big reveal at the end, and you're like, but this means nothing, right? It's like, da da da. Turns out I was actually a superhero. When did superheroes come into this? There's no superheroes in that. That's not what happened. But I'm as an example. Um, it's like, turns out I was the father all along. Of who? Whose kid were you a father of? Joey. Who's Joey? He's my son. He's back home. What does this have to do with the book? Absolutely nothing. It's like that bit from Spaceballs. I am your brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate. That kind of thing. I'm butchering the line, but you get the meaning. It's got to be relevant to the story, otherwise it doesn't really belong. I mean, there's room for like false flags and red herrings. I get that. There's trying to character building and world building. I get that too. But if it's not interesting and it's not moving the story along and it's not doing any of those things, why is it there? I kind of look back on one of my own books, Fear, and there is a subplot that I wanted to build up and be a major part of the book. And to be honest, it kind of doesn't land the way I wanted to. Now, Fear has so far been getting spectacular reviews. So maybe I'm just being a bit self-critical here. But there is a subplot. There's actually a couple of subplots, but they're small, they're minor, and they're red shirts, right? I wanted more people for the monsters to attack. And there's one in particular that just feels superfluous to me, going back and reading it again. And I debated taking it out, but it became, in terms of volume, a significant part of the book that the book would have been like 50 pages shorter if I took it out, and so I left it in. And again, I still wanted body count. It's just it I was torn. I left it in. I still second guess that. But did it really move the story along? And I don't think it did. And so I'm a little guilty of this, of myself, I really wonder if, I don't know, I second guess myself about that all the time. But it was also kind of building up the world, and I don't know. Maybe I'll just cut all this part out. I don't know, but um, you need to look at your work. What do they call it? Killing your darlings. You need to look at what you've written and say, okay, I like this scene, but is it moving the story? Is it adding anything to the story, or is it just glitter? You know, um, and sometimes you got to cut that stuff out. And like I said, with fear, I have one of those where there's this whole subplot. I sometimes I kind of wonder if I should have gone back in and just cut all that out. I really second guess myself on that one. So I'm guilty of it as well. I'm not just hampering. I'm not just trying to. We all do this. Um, but in this particular case of this book, I mean, there was just so much of it that it dragged the story down to the point where I had to kind of dig through it to try to find the story. And then when I finally got to the story, the big climax at the end had no weight to it. It was like, haha, big reveal. And I'm like, and what, how does this matter? So and I was really waiting for it to get good and it just never did. So I actually finished it, but didn't put it on the showcase. These are just examples of what I'm looking for when I'm going through a book. If like there was one more I'll talk about where the characters' motivations were very, very flat, right? I mean, it was a very, very short book. I kind of felt like this was the cliff notes of a much better book, but the characters were so flat and they felt like they were doing things because the plot demanded it, right? Character A saves character B. Why? No reason. Does character A like character B? Nope, they're complete strangers. Is character A sympathetic to character B? No, actually, they're from warring clans and they don't like each other. Then why the did he save her? Well, we need her later in the book because they're going to have a relationship. That's not an answer. Okay, there has to be something to motivate the character, and if the character is acting without motivation, he feels two-dimensional. And if he feels two-dimensional, he's basically doing it because the plot demands it. And that doesn't work. I again, self-recrimination time here. I had that problem with my first book with The Last Rite because the whole plot was this guy's in the small town trying to save his daughter, and I'm like, hey, here's a twist. Maybe he's estranged from his daughter. He didn't know he had a daughter. So, you know, obviously a dad who's raised his daughter would go save the daughter, but he's not had that. So would he, let's put some tension in there because, maybe when they say, hey, you should just leave your daughter, maybe he'll go, hey, I don't know this chick. I'm going to go. So let's put that pressure in the story. And it really didn't work out the way I wanted it to, because if he ever did that, he could have just left and the story would be over. And so I'm like, okay, well, now we got that push pull, that's fine, but then what's the pull? Right? What's motive? We got this counter motivation. We got this rationale for him to quit. What is the motivation for him to continue? And it was too uneven, right? There was too many reasons for him not to go save the girl and not enough reasons for him to save the girl. So I'm like, oh crap, this is not working. So I had to kind of go back and say, why would he? And I started like reverse engineering this like backstory of how he didn't have a father growing up, and this incident at work that has emotionally scarred him and everything like that, and that was part of his motivation, and this sense of duty and and kind of building this up and trying to make those two forces more equal so they actually had tension. And again, self-critical time. I think it was good enough. I repaired the story, but it wasn't as strong as I wanted it to be. There's the book that's in your head, and then there's the book that's actually on paper, and they're not always the same. And in the terms of the last right, that was part of the book that did not line up in my head as it did on the paper. I wanted a more dynamic push pull, and I feel like I got the balance well enough, but not great, if that makes any sense. So I mean, again, these are just tips from my DNF pile that I'm sharing with you, so you don't make these mistakes in your writing. Okay. And speaking of mistakes in writing, let's talk about this week's topic, which is dream sequences. Okay. We all know what we're talking about when we have dream sequences. One of the most famous is from Aliens. They found Ripley. She wakes up in the hospital. All of a sudden, the chest burster's coming out. It comes out, everything, and then she wakes up and it's a dream. Worst part of the movie, by far. Right? Great movie, fantastic movie. It's a classic. Love the movie. That scene should have been cut. Why do we hate those kind of scenes? I can sum it up in one thing. There's no stakes. Or whatever stakes we thought we had are now gone. And it's not just dream sequences. You can see this when you got like a time travel movie where you just go back in time and hit a reset switch. We kind of see that in the prequel series in Star Wars, where it's like, how do you rectify this whole C-3PO new Anakin Skywalker? Oh, we just wiped his memory. Yeah, okay, it fits in canon, it fits in the world, but it still feels like a cheat, right? Because basically the first three movies of 3PO's life are now gone, right? They got erased. They don't count anymore as far as this character is concerned. And that feels like a cheat. A Deus Ex Machina does the same thing, where it's like, no matter, oh, this whole thing has happened, and the world is ending, and how our heroes are going to absolutely survive, and then God shows up in the middle and says, I shall save you. Ding. Okay, I'm gone now, and leaves, right? Those kind of things rob the reader of the stake. You know, we're like, oh, how's it going to do this? How's he going to survive? Really, that was it? That was your solution? I mean, it just really feels like the writer wrote himself into a corner at that point. It didn't know how to get out of it. We need things in the story to matter. They need to have stakes. And when you have that kind of dream sequence, you're robbing it of the stakes, and it doesn't matter anymore. So, does that mean dream sequences are bad, or time travel, or Deus Ex Machinas? No, but you have to do them correctly. And what I mean by that is not taking away the stakes. So, for example, let's talk about Deus Ex Machina just real briefly. There's this excellent Rick and Morty episode where Jerry's being chased by this alien who's a jilted lover, and then right before she's about to kill Jerry, this other guy shows up and like, why are you here? This is my hunting grounds. Oh, I didn't. And Jerry's like, wait a minute, time out. And the kids are like, no, you've just been handed an Deus Ex Machina. You're taking it. Let's go. Right? They totally hang a lantern on it because it's played up as a joke. Right? I did something similar in ISF2 where we had a build up to a Deus Ex Machina. That's another reason why Deus Ex Machinas tend to piss people off, is because they show up out of nowhere and they're unearned. So not only did they take away the stakes, but you didn't earn it. So the first thing is, if you want a Deus Ex Machina, like I did in ISF2, you have to earn it. In my case, we had the heroes split into two. One group was actually talking to God, or at least the cherubs wannabe God. It's not a God, not yet, but I'm working very hard. And they're trying to convince the God, whose name is Al, to step in. that would be a Deus Ex Machina. But he's like, oh, no, I'm hands off. I don't do that. And they finally convince him while the other group of heroes are being captured and are getting ready for, or being readied for public execution. So yeah, we have a Deus Ex Machina because at the very end, the cherub's god shows up and says, stop, nothing like that. But the reason it works is because we've built up to it. We've had our heroes like pleading with us, God, please help. No, I can't do that. Here's how I can convince you to help. Okay, fine, you convinced me, let's go. Similar thing happened with The Last Rite. We had Daniel in a situation where he's about to die. Charlie shows up at the last minute, but it's not unearned because we see Charlie looking for Daniel. We see the wolf, who's another character in the book. He's kind of a spiritual animal kind of thing. Leads Charlie to where Daniel is, and then like vanishes because it's completed its task. It brought Charlie to Daniel. Now Charlie's just got to figure out how to get into the building. So when he shows up at the last minute, it doesn't feel like he came out of nowhere. We've built up to this. So it's fine to have supernatural beings that are guiding your path. It's fine to have people showing up at the last minute to save you. It just has to be earned. Another good example of that is look at Star Trek VI, where Sulu and the Excelsior show up at the last minute to save the Enterprise. Why does that not feel like a cheat? Because we had all these shots of Sulu and the Excelsior racing, the ship's shaking. Captain, the ship is going to fly apart. Then let it fly apart. And it's racing to get there. They almost don't make it. They don't just magically show up. They're the ones that told the Enterprise where to be. And now they're racing to the point where they're pushing their ship to the limit to get there. So when they do arrive, it feels earned. So if you're going to do like a Deus Ex Machina like that, make it feel earned. That's problem one with most Deus Ex Machinas. Or in this case, dream sequences. Because again, dream sequences usually have the opposite problem. It's not that they're not earned, it's that whatever you did earn gets taken away because it gets retconned. It goes, none of that counted. So when you're dealing with a dream sequence, the question becomes, how can it count? How can it matter? There's a few different ways you can do that. First of all, the dream could be prophetic. And they tried to do that a little bit with the aliens one, and I don't think it really landed, right? But that was sort of like how they try to adjust that and make that not as bad as it was. But look at example of, I think it was John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, where the scientific team is exploring this entity, and they keep having these reoccurring dreams. And it's the same dream, except every time it gets a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further, until the end of the movie, we actually get the full dream, and we realize it's a warning being transmitted from the future. And we finally get the full warning once the movie is over, and it's kind of like one of those cliche horror movie things where it's like, do we just find out that we're too late, or that the battle is actually just starting, or one of those kind of endings. But the point is that this dream had stakes. It was trying to convey something. The second is this idea that dreams are an altered state. In other words, they are actually happening. They're just happening in the mind, but that doesn't mean they're not happening. A perfect example of this is in the last Harry Potter book. Again, spoilers for anybody who's not read Harry Potter at this point, but Harry basically has a near-death experience towards the end, and in that near-death experience, he sees Dumbledore, who by this point in the stories has been dead for about a whole book. They have this whole experience, they have the discussion and everything like that, and at the end, Dumbledore's walking away, and Harry says, "Wait a minute, is this a dream or is this real?" And Dumbledore is like, "Well, I mean, it's a dream, but why does that mean it's not real?" Right? So this idea that even though it was a dream, it still mattered. It was still real. We have similar mechanisms in The Last Rite, where Daniel does have these dream sequences. But these dream sequences are where the spirit of his late girlfriend is having conversations with him and trying to explain to him things. In other words, here in the dreamland in the world of The Last Rite is where you can talk to the dead. The same thing happens in the Baby Eater, where Alexander has a near-death experience. As he's recovering in his dreamlike state, he's conversing with his dead father. So it's an alternate reality, but it's still a reality, if that makes any sense. I mentioned the idea of the dreams being an alternate reality. This is a bit of a tangent from that, but it's the idea that the dreams, what happens in the dreams, matter. And this is basically the Freddy Krueger answer, right? Where or the Inception idea. So even though you're in the world of the dream, what happens in there matters. It has if you die in your dream, you die in real life, and in this dream, you are having these big conflicts. We've seen that in Dreamscape, obviously, the Nightmare on Elm Street series, Inception. So that's just another mechanism where we can, and again, it's kind of in that same category of, the dream is an altered state, but it's still reality. It's a different reality, but it's still reality. It's a bit of a subset of that, but that's basically what we're talking about when we have things like that. The last thing that you can do to make a dream sequence mean anything, we talked a bit about it being prophetic. In other words, predicting the future or having some sort of foreshadowing to what's happening. The other is sort of the opposite of that, which is the character is trying to understand something about himself or what's happening. An example of this is, I think it was called Dead Again. Yeah, it's Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson. That's the one I'm thinking of. So in Dead Again, we're having this kind of a murder mystery, and it's not so much dream as it is hypnotic suggestion and that kind of thing, but it's still going into like a dreamlike state, so I'm going to count it. What's happening is, in order to figure out what's happening in the modern day, the main character is having past life regression therapy. He's going under hypnosis, and as he does that, he is revisiting the memories of his past life, where because basically time is repeating itself, right? It's 1991, but he is remembering what happened in his previous life in like 1940. So every time he goes into this dream state, we're getting a little bit more of the puzzle of what happened to him then, and that's relevant because he's trying to figure out from there what's happening now. Okay, so similar things like that, where the person is having through the dream some sort of flashback where he's dealing with a past trauma, is a good cliche, but it's there, right? Where he finally gets to the point towards the end where he's had enough of these dreams, that he's had enough of the puzzle, that he can solve what's happening now because things are repeating. So that's basically three ways that your dreams can actually have stakes or have weight. One is they're prophetic, that there's some glimpse into the future that if you listen to, it helps the main character figure something out. And again, they can't just be a gift from God, right? They have to come from somewhere. Either there's got to be some reason for it. Either this person has ESP and just does this, or some other entity which is relevant to the story is feeding, whatever it is. But you know it helps if there's a reason behind it. Uh, the second is that this is an alternate reality kind of situation, similar to um, like with Nightmare on Elm Street, where if you go to sleep and now in the world of your dreams, the creature's coming to get you, and if the creature gets you in your dreams, you die in real life. Um, similar times when we're in this altered state, and maybe this is the place where you can converse with beings from another dimension. Maybe this is how your main character talks to their god or talks to past relatives or something like that. Um, Similar to in Black Panther, where T'Challa has a sacred herb and gets to talk to his ancestors, kind of thing. Um, or lastly, it is where we are uncovering past trauma. Either it was memories that were repressed, or we're doing like a past life regression kind of thing, where we are getting clues of what's happening today by looking at what happened yesterday. Those are three ways that you can make your dreams have stakes and not feel like a cheap jump scare. So, with that out of the way, let's move on to this week's showcase. And again, this is why I love graphic novels, because when you're behind on your reading, the comics and the graphics novels help you get caught up. So, we are talking about Punk Rock Time Machine. This is definitely one of the more unique graphic novels I have read, mainly because pretty much every chapter has a song. Like, I don't mean like just a guy singing. I mean, they have like guitar chords. Like, there's an actual freaking song. I mean, and this goes on for pages, man. This is not a jingle, right? Like, this is pages. The whole chunks of this thing is it's just sheet music. So yeah, always kudos for somebody who's trying something new. So this book is basically one giant dick joke, which again, I'm fine with. I'm okay with lowbrow humor. Uh, the ship itself that the main character is flying around is designed to look like a giant dick and balls, right? That's page one. That sets the tone. This is the kind of thing we're going for, right? Um, this sounds like something a friend of mine would have written when we were in high school. He was a major stoner and a huge Star Trek freak, and he wanted to write Star Trek fan fiction with his main character. I think it was Kevin McJointfree, and his whole spiel, and I think I don't know if he really believed this, but I think he really wanted to believe this, was the world of Star Trek was real, that Gene Roddenberry was simply either a prophet or came back from the future and was just writing what he had actually seen happen. So, in his mind, this MC McJointfree winds up going to the Federation from our time, and of course becomes like the most kick-ass person and helps Kirk when he's in trouble and all this kind of stuff. Real typical fanfic stuff at that point. This has a very similar vibe to this, right? I mean, some of our characters, Cro-Magnon Dong, Cannabis Maximus, that was his name. We have a Viking named Queef. So, yeah, this is a stoner fantasy right here. This is stoner fanfic. So the basic plot is humanity is effed in the A, right? We've lost. This is the future. There's only one free human left. Everybody else has either been enslaved or killed. And so his only hope is to gather heroes from throughout human history to start battling the evil bad guys in, like, I think modern day San Francisco before things go really bad. And so this first book is basically just the heroes getting together, right? So all the heroes are selected from the God Squad, which is basically a collection of gods. I think one of them was like a Roman god, another one was like a Viking god, and everything like that. So it's very non-denominational kind of thing. But they're like, okay, here's all our chosen heroes. So this last guy, who's like a space cowboy flying a very phallic-shaped ship, goes back through time. And he doesn't just go back through time. He has to penetrate the space-time boundaries. So the ship, really, the sex puns are all through this book. It's not a spicy read, really, because there's no nudity, there's no real anything like that. But this is like PG-13 humor. This is like sci-fi South Park, right? This is like South Park meets stoner humor. Kevin Smith meets South Park. There we go. That's what we're looking at right here. So yeah, this first issue is basically just collecting the heroes and getting the mission started. So from there, I'm not sure what happens. That's always one of the problems when you're dealing with comic books and you're dealing with graphic novels, is you are getting just that slice of the story. So this is just the prologue. This is all this is. I found it entertaining. Again, I'm fine with gutter humor. I'm fine with raunchy humor. I write my own books full of raunchy humor. I'm a big South Park fan. I have watched all kinds of raunchy, Tripping the Rift. Futurama gets that way once in a while. In fact, I was surprised how raunchy Lower Decks got at times, which was I enjoyed. But I've watched all kinds of raunchy cartoons that have all tried to be in the next South Park, most of which have failed. But like, Brickleberries and Fazbar and Archer. Loved Archer. Archer went on for forever. That could have kept on going. So I'm not above that kind of humor. I'm into that. I'm fine with it. Just to let you know, that's where that is. I do think it's awesome though that there's like, after every chapter there's like 4 or 5 pages of sheet music. I don't play guitar. My son plays guitar. I kind of want to hand it to him to see what he can do with it. I want to see he's like, yeah, this sucks. He thinks everything sucks. He's 18. But yeah, definitely kudos for somebody trying something new. I think that's always worth showcasing. Again, the story wise, I think it works. I think it at this point in the story, it's pretty simplistic. A gathering of heroes, a lot of sex puns, and then and some drug references, and then at the end, the story actually is ready to start. That's all it is. So yeah, at this point, the story is really basic. Again, this is just chapter 1. I don't know what happens after this. It's a good, solid first chapter. Again, the gathering of the heroes. So, but if you want to check out some really kick-ass metal lyrics, if you want to try out some of these, in fact, I would love if somebody got this book and actually tried the guitar riffs. In fact, I had to look that up to see if the publishers or anything has actually done that, and they have that on like YouTube or something like that. That would be fabulous. If I find it, I will put a link into the show or something like that, so you can find it. That I think would be great. But if not, if somebody wants to get that and just start jamming out on that, give that a shot. I want to see that. That'd be great. I just want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Diabolic. Speaking of mature comics and ones laced with mature content, they will be at the Oakland Comic Con May 9th through 10th. So if you are in the Bay Area, feel free to check them out. Big fans of their work. I've read a couple of their books. They are fantastic, especially if you are like me, where you grew up reading things like heavy metal. In fact, if you like this book, you will love Diabolic's work. I can tell you that right now. Very, very 60s inspired, stoner cultured inspired in a lot of these shows, or a lot of these books that they write. Lot of hardcore spicy bits, a lot of hardcore horror bits. They have no holds barred adult content. So if you're a fan of that, check them out at the Oakland Comic Con. Give them a shot. I myself will be at Monsterpalooza at the end of this month. In fact, Diabolic, I would not be surprised if they're going to be there as well. I have to follow up with them on that. I have to see. But I know I will be at Monsterpalooza at the end of May. So visit us at Monsterpalooza. And until then, keep on reading.